Welcome, I'm Melva Persico. Come with me, meet people, and share their experiences as we take our culture to the world. And today our guest is Lynette Joseph Brown. And Lynette, thank you so much for being with us. Tell me, please, give us some more information about yourself.
Hi, Melva. Thank you very much for inviting me to your show. Um, yes, as you said, I'm Lynette Joseph Brown. Brown is my married name. So most people know me as Lynette Joseph from Guyana, right? I was born in Hopetown Village, West Coast, Berbice, but I grew up primarily in Linden. Linden is the bauxite mining town. When I left Linden, I went to Mona, the University of the West Indies at Mona campus in Jamaica. And for anybody who is familiar with UWI at Mona, I was an urbanite. I lived in Irving Hall. And then I moved to Trinidad and I worked at the University of the West Indies, but this time on the St. Augustine campus. My career interests were primarily in social development and education, but what I love to do for fun is reading. I love reading fiction, after time, you get into these boring technical stuff. And I just love reading fiction, listening to music and gardening, among other things. And finally, I have 3 grown children, aged 26 to 30 years old.
Okay, beautiful, beautiful. Yes, we have some of the same interests. Actually, just before this, I got ready for this. I was doing a little gardening. So
that's beautiful.
Let's just show, I have a little visual here so that we can show your journey. Okay, that you went from Guyana to Jamaica.
That's right.
And then from Jamaica, way over here, back closer to Guyana, to Trinidad, and you're in Trinidad right now. Good. Yeah. So as we now, you said you went to Jamaica first, and so was that the first country outside of Guyana that you had visited?
Actually, no, I visited Barbados for about 2 weeks to live with my aunt, not to live with my aunt, to visit my aunt, right? And that in itself was its own eye-opening experience for me, right? But in terms of living, I lived in Jamaica for 10 years. And then now I'm living in Trinidad for upwards of 20 years.
All right. So now, yes, I can imagine that the experience in Jamaica is one that you would like to share with us. What were your first impressions of Jamaica and that country, the culture?
Okay. So some of the things I remember that hit me is the first time that I saw the sea. I actually gasped, right? And I don't know why that should have been the first time because of course, Barbados has beaches and so on, but there's something about having gone to the beach in Jamaica where the water was really very blue, right? And I was like, so that's what it really looks like in real life, right? But outside of that, there was a language for Jamaica. You go to many other places and we understand that accents can make you ask, what is it again? But generally you could understand. But in Jamaica, it was like a whole new different language,
And wow, that's so interesting because, living in the US, people kind of feel that Caribbean speech is uniform. So they hear me and, oh, what's your accent? Are you from Jamaica? That's the first thing that comes to their mind, Jamaica. But really, as you're saying, the language, it's, and of course, that would be Jamaican Creole, or some people call it.
That's correct. Yes. That's correct, right? And that's the other thing that struck me about Jamaica and the language. I remember that in Guyana, when you're educated, then you are so concerned to ensure that you mark your status via your language. So then you make all the efforts to speak, quote unquote, properly, right? In Jamaica, I saw, and I really liked it, where from a lecturer to any colleague on campus who would have been doing a degree, they switch codes very easily, you know, so they can speak a standard language and then they can speak the patois, you know.
Right.
It is not to say that in Jamaica, there are not persons who also feel that language is a marker and would not be associated with patois in order to mark their status or Creole. But by and large, lots of people felt that it was fine. And so they switched very low. I liked it, you know, I thought it was
Yes.
really
Yeah. And
nice culturally.
yes, and maybe who knows? Maybe we might be moving in that direction. There's some steps in Guyana to really promote the language because really Guyanese Creole is a language, and in the
That's
Caribbean, we
correct.
have our Creole languages, and then we have the standard, and we have this, and it's you switch codes depending on
That's
what
right.
situation you're in. So yeah,
Yeah.
so that was in that. I'm sure that was an interesting experience for you.
But
And
one
so
other thing that wasn't so positive was it's the first place that I heard gunshots, right? In fact, the first night that we arrived, and of course, we didn't know what it was, but for persons who were accustomed, it was they heard the pop, 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 and it was like, those are gunshots, you know?
yes.
Yes.
So what did you do?
Well, we were safe on campus, you know,
Mm.
so it just brought home some of the things that we heard. And, you know, sometimes you hear negative things. We experience positive things, but the crime situation was certainly one of the things that brought home to us that, yes, there's that, you know.
To be a little careful when you're off campus, I would imagine, yes.
Yes, we did eventually, but you know, they say stranger don't know burial ground. I
Mhm.
remember Denise and I, Denise is another Guyanese friend of mine who went to Mona at the same time, and we left campus and headed downtown Kingston in spite of what everybody else was telling us to do some shopping and so on, you know, quite unaware, blissfully unaware, you know.
And I'm sure you're fine because so this
We
is what
were fine.
yeah, exactly. We're gonna talk a little bit about I don't know if this is where what you want to talk about, but stereotypes. There's certain
Yeah.
stereotypes about Jamaicans and their culture.
Yeah.
How maybe we could talk about those, and if if your experience living there was dispel those stereotypes.
Okay, so just to say that in Trinidad, there weren't so many new things because there are lots of ways in which Trinidad and Ghana were similar. So I didn't have that feeling of, oh, this is so different, you know, even though there were some things like carnival, you know, and so on that were different. But I think that stereotypes come up, they don't come out of thin air, so that some of the things are real and then sometimes they're overdone. So it is true that Trinidadians love to lime and have fun. There's no getting away from that. I remember working in this office and one of my colleagues was there very early. It's because it's carnival time. When it's carnival time, you party and you fete, and then you leave there and you come straight to work, you know, right? In Jamaica, one of the positive stereotypes has to do with the way that they're always front and center in this large world, this in spite of their size, you know? And for me, when it comes to creativity, the plays, the dance, the music, you know, they're really very good at that. But if you hear that Jamaicans are aggressive, by and large, it's not everybody that contributes to the stereotype. But when you have a stereotype, it's because many people do. And I remember when you go downtown or so and a vendor sees you and wants you to come over and look at the wares, they say, come here. And that thing always shocks my soul, right? Because it sounds so controlling, dominant, whatsoever. So when I tell my Jamaican friends, then they innocently ask, but if you want somebody to come, what do you say? And then I stop and think, and then I know again, we say, a minute, please, or could you come? You know, that kind of way, right?
Or maybe in the market might say, oh, auntie, come.
That's
Or
right.
something.
We're less direct, but in Jamaica, the amount of times I heard, come here, and I'm like, who are they talking to?
You command attention.
Definitely, right? But I think it's a part of a personality, Yes.
Okay, interesting.
But I've met some of the, if I compare Jamaica to Trinidad in terms of welcoming a stranger. If I am in the bus in Jamaica, they hear me talk, they want to know where you come from. They're curious. And then they say, you're not going back home. Another way of saying, you're welcome here. But in Trinidad, it's a little less so, right? It's a little less so.
I can imagine. But that's interesting. They would say you're not going back home, because I guess somebody like me, I might say, when they say that, I would say, but I'm initially, maybe I would not have understood that to be something welcoming.
Okay.
I might have thought of that as something negative. But,
no, they're like, stay here with us,
Oh, nice.
Yes.
Yeah. That's really, really good to hear. And so what are some of the things that you appreciate more about the people and the cultures in these places that you've lived? Well, in Jamaica, where you've lived, and Trinidad, where you now reside.
Right, as well. I love the culture in Jamaica. I really, really do. When you see me jumping in a taxi to go watch a play, my first experience in Jamaica was a play with two persons alone on stage, 8 o'clock Jamaica time. And to think that they caught your attention, I think it's the place where I've seen the quality cultural experiences. And up to this day, every time I go to Jamaica, I have to go and see a show because I know it will be quality. I really admire that. Generally, the go-get-itness of the persons. I like the directness. Jamaica has 2 Jamaicas, and as a dark-skinned African young girl, right, I know that there's always some section of the society that will be very appreciative of me and think of me as beautiful, a little daughter, which was opposite to my experience in Barbados, where it's the only time I've ever gone a place and nobody, when you're 21 years old, expect to see some admiring glances and stuff. No, not in Barbados. In Trinidad, the food. I mean, the diversity of the population makes it some really, really very interesting food, and you can go probably to a restaurant a day for 2 months or 3 months and never have the same kinds of things, right? I mean, maybe that might be superficial, and if I think more, I might find some other things, but those are the things that jump out at me.
Yes, and that's interesting because, one of the things that I think about, we're from in Guyana, even though we're geographically in South America, we're culturally, because of our history, culturally, we're part of the English-speaking Caribbean. That's and right. Many people feel that our culture is uniform, but really it isn't so. So your experience really helps to highlight that, we can find some similarities, yes, but we can also find it's not the same. It's not as though you're going to, it's home. It's somewhere different from home when you go to another place in the Caribbean.
Different and similar in many ways, in some ways too. So I've always noted that when I'm in the Caribbean, I feel comfortable, I don't feel very strange, as opposed to when you go elsewhere.
Yes, I understand. And as we continue in talking about that, I know you talk about some things that were a little, strange to you when you moved first, but did you have any, how were you able to adapt? Because you spent 10 years in Jamaica and then over 20 years now in Trinidad. How were you able to adapt to those cultures?
That's a good question. And I think that, first of all, you really lean on the things that are familiar, right? So in every one of those countries, there were things that were familiar to things at home, including some people, because people do migrate, and you find Guyanese in different parts of the world and including the Caribbean, right? So that's one kind of coping mechanism. But the other thing is that you also embrace the differences, you know? And for me, diversity was always something about which I was curious, that I really appreciated. And so when you appreciate people's differences, they warm to you as well. They like that you appreciate this about them, and then it makes them curious about you as well, right? So there would be those things. And over time, you learn that people in general have a lot of similarities. They all want to love, they want to make friends, you know. They have some of the same hopes and dreams. They do some of the same things. And you really connect on that level with people. People for me are really very important. You know?
That's really good. That's, you know, good to hear, and I'm glad that you bringing this out, because it's this is a part of why we're doing this show, you know, to help to see that we, as humans, we have so much that we have in common. There's so much that, even though we may live in different places, we may do things differently, and different isn't bad. It
That's
isn't necessarily
right.
bad. Yes.
That's right.
So as we so you've lived in these places, and have you had opportunities to share your Guyanese culture in
Oh,
Jamaica and in Trinidad?
definitely. In Jamaica and in Trinidad. When I was in Jamaica on Irving Hall, we have an annual thing called Culturama. And that's where all of the students from the different parts of the region are able to share their culture. I shared kwekwe with them. I shared pepper pot. I made roti, because roti is not a thing in Jamaica like it is in Trinidad. And they thought my roti was so good. And any Guyanese or Trinidadian who had my roti would not be impressed.
I'm sure yours is better than mine.
A friend whose mother would make me come to her house to make roti, right? Right? Maybe it was like sada roti, you know, meaning a little stiff, but you know, you can eat it with curry. So, and in Trinidad, I did. In Jamaica, that's how I shared my culture, and would talk to anybody about Guyana and so on in that way. In Jamaica, I worked at the UN agency for a while, and on an annually they would also have something almost like Culturama, where you would share dishes, which tells you that people really bond around food a lot, you know, right?
Mhm.
And again, I made bread and I made pepper pot, you know, and things like that. And again, just talking about your country and, you know, and that kind of stuff, you know, you share with them. One of the things I found out living in the Caribbean, that many countries thought that Guyanese were very hospitable. That's when they went to Guyana, had an opportunity to meet Guyanese. That's the thing that they felt came to them, that Guyanese are very hospitable. And they thought that Guyanese were very intelligent, very bright, you know? So that's something that I always had people say to me, you know?
Yeah,
So
that's
always
good. Very
nice.
positive,
Yeah,
positive.
yeah.
That's wonderful. Yes. So as we now, how often do you get to go back to Guyana to visit?
Um, I when the children were small, not very often, because you know, family were elsewhere in the world, and that's where you go. But recently, quite often, at least once a year, and it's always nice. You know, you don't realize how much you miss home until you go back home and you feel the familiarity,
Oh, yeah.
right? home is familiar in a way that other places are not. You know, you walk the streets of your childhood, and then you even see some people that you know or who remember you, you know. It's always nice.
But have you, when you go back, do you find any difficulty? I mean, you say you feel so comfortable when you're back home, and I understand that feeling. But are there any things that feel a little strange that, you know, having lived away from home, that you have to,
Yeah.
you know, you have a little difficulty adjusting to when you go back to visit?
Not really. And I think that part of it is because I've lived in the Caribbean, right? And we share so much, you know, we share so much in common, right? There are things that you realize that you want for home that are not necessarily there, or you know the possibilities for making changes exist and you don't see it, right? But basically, what I've found in the Caribbean, I always keep saying we're like fingers, you know, somebody's strength is somebody's weakness. And so it's one of the reasons why I think we really need to link up much more than we do. We're doing it with CARICOM, but we can do a lot more of it because we all have strengths and weaknesses. So when I go home, especially when and maybe if I go home to live, which I plan to do, then when you see that the thing on a constant basis, then you become more critical, right? But when you go home for holiday, you're just, home, home, you know? And so, you know, there's less criticism and more appreciation, you know?
Very good, very good. Yes, so just we're gonna wrap up, and before we do, just a couple of things. What are there any lessons that you've learned from living abroad that you would like to share with us?
Yes, I really think personally that patriotism is overrated. You know, I think that, and some people might like to hear that, but you know, these borders that we put up and that we say make us different from this person or that person, especially in the Caribbean. As a Guyanese, in some countries, you know, you've been treated differently and sometimes negatively just because of the country you come from. But basically, I mean, you know, these borders, I think, are problematic, right? And the way we treat migrants and people, where we say that just coming from this particular country entitles you to a whole lot of different treatment and resources than somewhere else. Why? Who says so? You know, so that's one thing. I think the lesson that I've learned is to look at our similarities, you know, and learn from each other, just as we talk about best practices, and try very hard to learn from the lessons of history and really try not to repeat the same things, right, that didn't work for all of us, you know. Right. I think we really, on a larger scale, should really try to think about those things.
Yes, I agree with you. And finally, what are your thoughts about, I mean, I know you've said a little, some of this as we went along, but just to kind of wrap it up, what are your thoughts about the importance of appreciating other cultures?
Well, yes, you're right. When you appreciate other cultures and when you're exposed to other cultures, it expands you, right? The things that you used to think and the narrowness of your vision, right? You know, when you get that expansion, it grows you, it grows your capacity, and it grows your ability to form relationships, right? And just get along with other people.
Yes, yes. And I'm so happy that, you know, you've really expressed that very well, Lynette. And I'm so happy that you were able to be with us today. I didn't say it up front, but Lynette and I have known each other. I'm not going to say for how many years, but for a very, very long time. And so I'd like to thank the viewers for watching Our Culture to the World. And I look forward to being with you, seeing you soon. We're going to meet new people, share their experiences in our next episode of Our Culture to the World.
Thank you, Melva.
Thank you so much, Lynette.